Singing that, Jerry. We used to sing that every morning after chapel for 2 years. So every time I hear that, it brings back memories. If you will, go ahead and turn to Revelation chapter 17. For those that maybe have not been following along, we have been building upon the book of Revelation, a chapter at a week, or a chapter each week. And so we've now come to Revelation chapter 17. We just got done talking about these 7 vials of judgment, or the 7 vials of wrath which were being poured out. And as we get here to Revelation chapter 17, for anybody who may have had doubt up until this point, it will be clear who it is working in unison and on behalf of the beast. So if you will, go ahead and follow along with me here in Revelation 17. We will come to one section, and I'll let you know when we get there, that I'm not 100% positive, but I'm 90-some percent, as close as I can get. So I'm going to tell you what I think the logical explanation is, and then I'll leave it up to you to go and to investigate that a little bit further. But the point of the text will be seen. So let's go ahead and start back up in Revelation 17:1, where we left off right after the vials of judgment were poured out. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. All right, so we begin here to talk about this vision that John is having here. And he's going to start talking about this great whore. Now, we've already seen a reference to Babylon here. This great whore that's being discussed sits upon many waters. Now, you'll find later this is a ruling nation. There was only one ruling nation at this time that sat upon many waters. The Babylon being discussed here, and which we'll see further down, clearly is the Roman Empire. More specifically, we will actually see the city of Rome itself mentioned here in this chapter. Okay, we know for a fact this can't be the literal Babylon that was way over on the Euphrates River. This is not the literal Babylon in which the Israelites were taken into captivity. John says that this woman, or this harlot, down in verse 18, he says, is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So the very last verse of this chapter ties in with the very first verse of the chapter. This woman who is being discussed here, this great whore, is the one that is currently reigning over the kings of the earth. So John's talking about a city in his day and a nation during that time period. Now, we've already mentioned Babylon. We'll talk a little bit about it. But Babylon at this time didn't rule over the kings of the earth. Rome did. And as a matter of fact, in 330 BC, so 330 years before Christ, when the Persian Empire fell to Alexander the Great, the city of Babylon was destroyed. It was destroyed once and for all, for never to be heard of again. As a matter of fact, the very last time we even find it being mentioned on Babylonian clay tablets was about 10 BC, 10 years before Christ. And so this was long before John had written this. The actual city of Babylon was destroyed. And so at the time that John is giving this revelation, Babylon didn't rule over anything. As a matter of fact, Babylon had been destroyed quite a few hundred years before this. Now, the reference to Babylon here then is to draw a parallel. We know that just as Babylon was a harlot back in her day, just as she was involved in all types of heinous and horrible activities, and just as Babylon was destroyed, so too will Rome, or the nation at this time that is ruling. That's why Babylon's being used here. Rome itself is a symbol of this great world city of lust and seduction. Now, they use Babylon often to refer to this city, but this harlot that we're talking about, referencing Babylon of old, but knowing that it is now actually talking about Rome, it has all of the characteristics of the cruelty that we saw throughout the old times. You can think back to the cruelty of Nineveh. You can think back to the commerce of Tyre. We know Rome was doing exceptionally well commercially. The pleasures of Babylon, those same things were being seen there in Rome. And it's sad to say, but even the religious whoredom of Jerusalem as they went after idolatry. All of that is summed up in the city, or the Roman Empire, but specifically even in the Roman city itself. Notice verse 2. Whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So we start off talking about this one in charge, this great whore. But then we find that there are other kings who've actually committed whoredom or fornication with her. This is talking about the alliances of Rome. Now, there were many other nations that involved themselves in the sinful activities which Rome promoted. They also aligned themselves with Rome in order that they could become wealthy. To be in an alliance with Rome would also aid them commercially, and so they committed fornication, and they were involved in many of the same things that Rome themselves were doing. Now, you guys have heard the old saying, if you lay down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. That's what these alliances had produced. You had these other nations now who are just as involved in and inviting into the sins that Rome was involved in. Notice verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. This is Revelation he's talking about in this vision and panorama that he's having. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. All right, we start off talking about this scarlet color. Well, certainly this indicates blood and death, but it's also interesting. This is the color of royalty. Here we've got actually wicked royalty. Now, he mentions 7 heads and 10 horns. This is actually the same beast that emerged earlier from the sea that we talked about for a short time. What we've got here, he says he sees this woman sitting upon this scarlet beast. What we have is the world of lust, really headed by the Roman Empire, riding upon this beast, okay? And the beast is really probably the one who is in alignment here with the emperors that are carrying this out. But you've got a world of lust and sin and idolatry, and it's being supported and carried around by this beast. And here's what's interesting. He gives the names on there. He says it's full of the names of blasphemy. Well, that's what originated in the beast's mind, and we're going to see here in a couple of verses. Actually, if I'm looking down to verse 5, we see that these names of blasphemy are tied in mentally with what they've accepted. It permeated the whole empire. These people were all involved in it. They all promoted it for the most part, and much of that included not only the blasphemy, the emperor worship, the sin, the idolatry, and everything else that goes along with it, but they were also persecuting the saints. Now again, remember, scarlet was the symbol and color of luxury and splendor. As a matter of fact, it was the color of royalty throughout time. And the royalty at this time would have been the Caesars. Okay? The scarlet sin that we're talking about here is the complete opposite of the whiteness of purity and righteousness that we've seen throughout the book of Revelation. You even find it talked about in Isaiah 1:18. Now notice verse 4, we get some more information. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, so she's got this color of royalty on her, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now remember, earlier she was described as a whore. Here she's all dressed up, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, and she's got this gold cup full of abominations and filthiness in her fornication. So she's dressed in such a way as to make it look like she's full of splendor and glory. And if you think about it, many people are like that today. They'll try to hide whatever their sin is and deceive other people by making their outward appearance look as though they're safe or pure or righteous. You've got that here. Now, in her hand, you got the golden cup. Now, again, this is another symbol of luxury and wealth. It would go along with the scarlet coloring that we find with her. But normally when you have a nice golden cup, you'd expect a fresh drink out of it, right? That's not what she has in her cup. Her cup contains abominations and filthiness and fornication. These are all the detestable things, really, that would have been present at that time. And notice verse 5 as we get more information about this whore. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great. Let me pause for a minute. Remember, Babylon had been destroyed 330 years, actually about 400 years around this time prior to this. So Babylon didn't even exist anymore, right? This is simply using the word Babylon to show a nation that was just as bad and had been destroyed to represent the one being talked about. And upon her head was a name, again, it's on her forehead. It says, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, the harlot here to John's readers, again, would have symbolized Rome. And you're going to see that a little bit more as we continue on in this chapter. Rome, in turn, would have symbolized all of the sinful activities, lust, seduction, and persecution of the saints, Caesar worship, all that stuff that would have taken place at this time. And that which the harlot was trying to keep hidden, giving that beautiful appearance outwardly, but knowing she was full of sickness and decay, it's starting to be unmasked. Matter of fact, we learn here that she's the mother harlot of all seduction and everything that would be detestable at that time in the sight of God. And I want you to notice again about the name on the forehead. It's so interesting that so many people will go to the book of Revelation and they talk about the mark of the beast being a literal mark, and yet they don't say anything about the people of God having names on their forehead. They don't say anything about this harlot having a literal name on her forehead. Again, all of these are simply symbols representing the fact that they had mentally accepted the teachings of the mark which they bear. That's all, again, that we have in the meaning of that. Look at verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. All right. So, in the harlot's intoxicating drink here is the blood of martyrs. It goes along with the abominations and filthiness of her fornication, which aligns up there in verse 4 with this golden cup. The idea of thirsting and being excited by drinking on blood is pretty sad, and that's the vision that he's having here. They had been slain oftentimes for entertainment. They certainly were slain and killed just because they hated the fact that they stood for everything that was good and righteous. And that's oftentimes the case. Even then, even at that time, you had those who were involved in wickedness who wanted to stamp out that which was pure and right, and you have the same thing today. Those who are promoters of the things that are sinful, just watch the news. Just watch the news recently if you don't think that's true. The people who are promoting all the sinful activities, they want to do away with anything that has to do with God, with His Word, with His ways of life. And that's what you've got here. Look at verse 7. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her. So she's riding this beast. They're working in unison, which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So the angel realizes John's full of wonder. He actually says that he's wondering here, and he's asking him why he is wondering. He said, I'll give you the answer. What we find here is this woman and this beast are indivisible. She's riding the beast, the back of the beast. He's in essence controlling her, governing her, but they're working together in unison. Okay, he's supporting this harlot, this whore. Now, let me read verses 8 and 9 together. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. All right, I'm going to skip over verse 8 for just a minute, and we'll get back down to it as we hit verse 11, because we're going to have to tie a couple of verses together as I give you, I think, the best logical answer I can. So let's start here with verse 9, and we'll come back to verse 8. So he mentions that there are the 7 heads, which are the 7 mountains. For anybody who knows anything about geography and has done study on history, that is what Rome is known for. Rome is known as the city of the 7 hills. They've always been known as the city of the 7 hills or the 7 mountains. There is no doubt that that is who he is talking about right here. He is talking about Rome. Okay, notice verse 10. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. All right, if they've fallen, that means they're dead. And 1 is. All right, so 1 is currently. And the other is not yet come. Okay, there's another one that's not yet. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. All right, so when that one does come, he's only going to be king for a short time. Now, let's go down to verse 11. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to try to give you the logical answer. I did not put this in your notes, and so if you want me to repeat this to you later, or if you want me to even repeat it now, just hold your hand up, and I'll go back through it again. Notice verse 11. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, so he came from the 7, and goeth into perdition. All right. Let me try to give you the most logical answer based on history to see if it would coincide with what we have here. Let's talk about the first 5 that were fallen. He talked about 7 kings, and he says 5 of them are fallen, okay? The first 5 that have fallen based on history, and what I think he's talking about would be Augustus would be the first, Tiberius would be the second, Caligula would probably be the third, Claudius is the fourth, and then the 5th that had already died would have been Nero. Okay? Then there were actually 3 kind of very short-term kings. They were only in office for 7 months, 3 months, and 9 months. Their names were Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. These guys were all victims of a horrible civil war. They didn't make any contribution whatsoever to the Roman Empire. All right, now, we get back to, he says there is one that is, okay, there's one that's current. The one that I believe he's talking about here, based on history, would be Vespasian. Okay, here's the reason why. When you go down and you look at verse 10, I believe the one that would come and would only be in office for a short time is Titus. Titus, when he came, he ruled for 2 years and 2 months and 20 days. And in verse 10 it says this, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, and I think he's talking about Titus, he must continue a short space. Okay, I think that's Titus, verse 10. And then, you remember there was one that said it was one of the 7. Well, there's only one other king that comes after this who was a descendant from one of those 7 I just mentioned, and that would be Domitian. He was the son of Vespasian. So, he would have been one of the 7 kings I just gave. Okay? That's the most logical answer I can give you based off history on which kings he's talking about here. We do know that under Nero the saints were severely persecuted, and when Nero died, persecution for a time actually ceased, or it was greatly diminished. And then we know when Domitian came to power, the persecution resumed. And not only did it resumed very mightily. And that's why in verse 11 when it speaks of Domitian as the beast which was and is not, we get very clearly the idea that it's resurfaced. He's basically Nero that was revived. The beast had reared its ugly head through Nero, and then Nero died. You had Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, those ones who were fighting in the Civil War. They were too busy to even persecute the saints. But then under Vespasian, when he came to office, or actually became to a position of authority, he began to persecute under national policy, and it was just like Nero. And so he basically took the place. All right. We know that when Domitian started, the persecution was severe. It actually lasted until about the year 311. 311. And if you'll recall, I told you that the persecution of the Christians was severe and really ran about 250 years. Okay? Now notice verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. All right, so they have not yet come, but they're going to come. They're also going to persecute the saints, but they're not here yet. But notice this about them. It says, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. If I were to go visit someone and they said, yeah, I can meet with you, but I only have 1 hour, the idea is you're not going to have very much time. That's the same thing with these 10 client or future kings that are going to come forward. They will come to power. They will persecute the saints, but they're not going to have a long time to do this, and this would most likely be from Trajan to Diocletian, the ones that he's talking about here. Now, verse 13. Notice these 10 future kings. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. All right, they're again going to continue doing exactly what the beast has been doing up to this point. There will be still persecution of the saints. They have one mind, and that mind is for them to continue to persecute the saints. Yet we also know that the Christians that are faithful have one mind, and those faithful Christians, they're going to overcome. And that's what we see in the next verse there in 14. These shall make war with the Lamb, going back to these kings, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So the Lord's going to overcome them, and so will the faithful that are with him. Now you've got the word here, chosen. That doesn't speak of the word election as many would use, where they talk about the saints being elect. This word's talking about choice. That's what chosen is. There's a choice there. These are the faithful ones who by choice have been faithful to carry out the will of God and to endure even up to and including death. Notice verse 15. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Now we've talked about this already. The waters being representative of the people or the nations. The ones here being talked about are influenced by the beast. And one of the major weaknesses we find when we go back and we look at the Roman Empire, we talked about it being mixed of miry and clay. they had a lot of inability to bring in different nations and to unite them as one, as Roman people. That was very common for the Romans to do. They would move and disperse people and bring other people in, but they weren't truly Romans, and so that was a weakness. They couldn't get these diverse people into one group. Notice verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, see, they're working in unison with him, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Well, why would that happen? Well, what you've got going on here is inner strife. You have inner strife between those who were supporting the works of the beast and in alliance really with Rome, but they're not really in alliance with Rome. They never really did become as one. Notice verse 17. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill His will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. So these people are going to give their kingdoms to the beast, to Rome for a time, and they are also going to be included in the judgment that's going to come upon Rome. Now notice verse 18. And the woman which thou sawest, this really sums up the chapter, is that great city. Remember earlier we talked about this is the city with the 7 hills, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now at this time when he wrote, there's no doubt who he's talking about. He's talking about the Roman Empire. He's talking about the city of Rome, the city of 7 hills. This is the one that was persecuting the saints. This is the one that had the emperors in place who were carrying out the persecution, who were requiring emperor worship. I know that what we've looked at here so far is a fairly brief look at this chapter, but again, time and time again, we're seeing throughout the book of Revelation who it is that's carrying out the persecution, and the ultimate point, virtually in the majority of chapters, is that the saints are going to overcome, and they will in the end prevail. As I draw this to a close, our concern is for anyone who's here who's not yet become a Christian. For those who are Christians, if you need some way be aided by the church, maybe through prayer. If you're here and you're not yet a Christian, let one of us sit down and talk with you about why you need to hear the gospel and believe that Jesus is the Messiah, why you need to repent of your sins, confess Christ, and then be immersed in water. If you're here and you've not been immersed, please don't leave without talking to one of us. If you are here and you're a Christian, if there's a way we can help you, if we can pray for you, or we can assist you in some other spiritual way, you can come forward as we're led in a song of invitation.